Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for attending our webinar. And this one is going to be extremely important. Before we get into all the nitty-gritty, just remind everybody to please keep your computers muted. This portion we will be recording. In approximately 10 days, you will receive a message from Seniors Action Quebec with the link to the recording, and it will be uploaded on our YouTube channel and Seniors Action Quebec's website. First of all, I would like to thank our funders who have made these webinars possible. This is the last one for this fiscal year, and we'll see what happens come summertime and next fall. I'd like to thank the Secrétariat de Relations avec les Québécoises d'Expression Anglaise for the funding that has allowed us to produce these webinars. And of course, we acknowledge our continuing partnership with Éducaloi with all their support that they've provided for us. In planning this topic, it was amazing to me how many seniors especially, but also younger people who have not made their final arrangements as far as the funeral parlor, what type of service, cremation, whatever, with their funeral home. And costs are going up, astronomic increases every year. So I thought this would be a good topic to remind us that it's an important subject, although it's not a nice one that we have to address. And also things are changing as far as the final wishes and services that people want. So I'm delighted that we have Mary Pallett, who is a funeral director and director of pre-arrangements at Kane and Fetterly Funeral Home. And this is a role that she has had since 2010. Mary and I go back to, I think it was probably about 2017, maybe 16, when Bill 52 was just coming out and we were talking about end of life, and Seniors Action Quebec had a conference, and Kane and Fetterly were certainly participants and had a kiosk and made presentations. So I'm delighted to be able to pull on her once again for her expertise. Over 30 years of community involvement with NDG, Mary has been very passionate about supporting seniors and advocating for local needs. A Concordia University political science graduate, Mary has served in leadership roles with, and I'm going to name a few organizations who are probably on the line even this morning: NDG Community Council, the Montreal Council of Women, and a co-founder of Older and Wiser lecture series. She also volunteers with the Eva Marsden Center Seniors programs. Guided by a deep sense of service and compassion, Mary is committed to making a positive impact on both the families she serves and her community. Mary, without further ado, I'm turning it immediately over to you because I know you have a great deal of information to share with us, and we will have a question and answer period at the end of Mary's presentation that Katia will direct. Thank you, Mary.
All right, thank you, Ruth. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss my favorite topic, funeral planning. Everybody else hates that topic, but I love it. So here we go. So today I'm going to speak to you about making wise decisions for you and your family that will give you definite peace of mind. It's feedback I get quite a bit. Next slide. So let me introduce myself. As Ruth said, my name is Mary Pallett. I am a funeral director at Kane Fairley Funeral Home, which is a family-owned funeral home here in Montreal, and I am the pre-arrangement director there. I have been with Kane Fairley since 2010, and my goal is that families feel comfortable asking questions and making informed decisions about pre-planning and funeral arrangements. I do a lot of community work in the sense that I do free seminars just to discuss this topic because I think it's something that we don't talk about enough, and it's hugely important, and I would like people to feel comfortable talking about this. So here we go. Next slide. So today's topics that we're going to cover is the importance of pre-arrangements, again, how to plan, what you need to know about pre-planning, so some of the common questions that I get, and why are pre-arrangements important, and different payment options. Next slide. So a lot of people say to me, why should I bother making a pre-arrangement? Or a lot of people feel there's no need to make a pre-arrangement. And I just want to make something clear as well. There's two types of pre-arrangements per se. There's a pre-arrangement where you can meet with your local funeral home or funeral home of your choice and meet with a counselor there and discuss funeral options. And you can, when you've, gone through this process and made your decisions, you can register your wishes with the funeral home and give them the information they need without prepaying. So at least they have, which is honestly the most important part, your wishes on file. They know what kind of services you want. They know what kind of funeral you want. And then there's the pre-arrangement where you pay for it in advance, and I will explain that further on. But people say, why should I bother making pre-arrangements? Well, first of all, it is a huge help to your family. I'm sure many of you, like myself, I saw at work, so many people during the pandemic were obviously caught off guard and were forced, unfortunately, to make arrangements. And a lot of people were starting from zero, like literally no idea where to start, what their loved ones' wishes were. It's a lot of pressure to put on your family if you've never had a conversation about your final wishes, if you've never told, your loved ones what kind of service you want, and then when the time comes, it's them who are making all these decisions. So I know a lot of people aren't comfortable talking about it. I know, my kids didn't want to hear about it when I told them about my arrangements, but you got to force them because honestly, you're really doing them a favor. And it also ensures that you get the funeral that you want. In a lot of cases, we see, that certain generations are maybe more religious or more traditional or members of a church or a religious organization, but their kids are not, right? Statistically, boomers are very different from the generation before them. So if that's something that's important to you, sometimes if it's your kids planning your funeral, it's just it doesn't even occur to them that that's something that would be important to you because it's not important to them. So you have to really make sure that you let your family know what you want and why you want it and how you would like to see it proceed. Then, of course, there's the financial option. When you do pre-arrange, when you pre-arrange, and I'll get into this further, you can pay in advance. So you can either pay in advance in full or monthly. But when you sign the contract, the minute you sign the contract, you're guaranteeing the prices. You're freezing the prices. So, isn't that great in any situation, right? So as Ruth mentioned, especially since COVID, the cost of funeral arrangements have skyrocketed for so many reasons, but even like casket companies, like the cost of gas is so much more expensive. So, the suppliers are putting those costs onto the funeral home. So when you pre-arrange and when you prepay, you're locking in the price at today's price. So if you only use the arrangement in 20, 30 years, you're really saving quite a bit of money. And then again, like I said, peace of mind. So in general, women, and I have to say I've been doing this for 15 years, as Ruth mentioned, and I would say, frankly, about 75% of the families I see for pre-arrangements are women. And women initiate this process in the family because they want to reduce the emotional burden on their children. I cannot tell you the amount of times I've heard, I don't want my son to have to deal with this, or I don't want my kids to have to go through this. I want to take care of everything for them. It's just a continuation of what we do for our kids, right? We do so many things. We take care of so many things for them. This is just one more thing. And then in general, men would prearrange because they see financially that it's advantageous to them and to their family. Next slide. Other reasons, and we see this a lot here in Montreal, obviously, my children are scattered around the world. There are many people, especially many Anglos, whose kids do not live in Quebec. So, you know, sometimes where the death happens suddenly, there isn't any time to prepare. So what do? What if they can't get back to the city? What if they can't come back to Canada? If you are registered with a funeral home one way or another, it certainly makes it easier. And actually on this point now, when a person dies in Quebec, there's a system that we all share, funeral homes, hospitals, and cemeteries. So you're going to be asked at the hospital, or if the death occurs at home, which funeral you're using, if you thought about that, because the doctor who is signing your attestation of death has to assign this SP3, as it's called, to a funeral home. And unless that's assigned to a funeral home, the funeral home cannot do the transportation of deceased. So that's another reason, if you've never even thought about it and you start shopping at that point, it delays everything. It delays the transport, and then you have to go find the original doctor who signed the paperwork to get him to, it's a lot of paperwork. So another reason, fighting in the family. I hate to bring it up, but it happens all the time. It's unreal how much we see that in the process of making funeral arrangements. I have a theory about that, but you know, sometimes it's easier to be angry than sad, and these things seem to come up when making arrangements. If you have 4 kids and you're trying to get them to decide on something, I'm sure you can imagine, while deciding on their mother's, you know, last goodbye is not an easy thing to get everyone on board for. And another reason is financial. People will say to me, oh, I'm not going to prepay. I don't need to prearrange. You know, I have life insurance. Great. That's true. Valid. Good point. Unfortunately, sometimes your life insurance is assigned to a person, obviously. There's no guarantee that that person is going to give you the funeral that you want. We like to think it's going to happen. You know, it could be a friend, it could be a family member, like no judgment, but I can guarantee you it doesn't always happen the way we want it to happen. So, and people have to pay out of pocket. At Kane and Fetterly, when we meet a family who haven't had prearrangements and they're walking in because someone's died, we ask for 30% deposit. That's not so bad, but on, you know, a $10,000 funeral, say, it's still quite a bit of money. Many funeral homes, I would say majority, ask for full payment up front before they will do the funeral. So that's a big chunk of change that someone's going to have to pay to get this funeral going. Another reason is, like I mentioned, you know, you want your family to respect your beliefs and wishes. Or sometimes there's so much intermarriage, you know, sometimes people don't realize different cultures, cultural norms, and these things that maybe weren't so prevalent in your life, they seem to really come up a lot in our end of days, and people who aren't necessarily religious or traditional will say, oh, you know, just in case, let's do it the way I was raised, or, you know, the way tradition dictates. And again, maybe, you know, the person making your arrangements is not aware of what these different religious or cultural needs are. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to look into this. Let me think about making my funeral arrangements. So there's many things you have to think about. And that's the point. Honestly, you can call any funeral home, call them up and say you want to meet with a pre-arrangement counselor to discuss funeral arrangements. And please understand you're under no obligation. And know that not all funerals are the same. So definitely do your research in the funeral homes. In many funeral homes, the counselors are paid strictly on commission. So don't let them pressure you into signing anything when you go in and meet with them, or maybe do it on a phone call or through Zoom. That way they can't lock you into anything. But I do a lot of meetings by Zoom, and I do a lot over the phone. But it's very important to have a conversation, because they're going to ask you questions. The funeral counselor will ask you questions maybe you haven't thought of. And the starting point is, do you want to be cremated or do you want to be buried? So I don't know if some of you have thought of that already. With cremation, there's two options. You can be cremated right away, like after death. And then if you choose to do a celebration of life or gathering with the ashes, or you can be viewed, if you want a more traditional service with a, 1-day viewing of the body, and then the cremation can take place. So those are some options that you have to think about. Do you want a celebration of life? Do you want that in a funeral home, at a restaurant, at a golf club, at somebody's home? Do you want the ashes present? Do you not want the ashes present? Do you want to be viewed? Do you want the casket open? Do you have family members who live far away? For them, it would be important for them to see you maybe one last time. Do you want to be buried here in Montreal? Do you want to be repatriated? Which means we have a lot of families who are not from Montreal originally. So people would be surprised to know some people like from the islands. We have people from France, many people from France who choose to have their casket shipped home. And that's something that we take care of too. We take care of all the paperwork. And sometimes, depending where that's going, it could be a less expensive option than buying cemetery property here in Montreal. So, and the same thing with the ashes. If you're not from Montreal originally and you would like your ashes to go home, that's something that we could take care of also. So we can repatriate your ashes. So as you can see, there's quite a few things to think about, and these are really just the basics. But if you meet with someone in a funeral home, or this is like a good starting point, maybe to questions to think about. So of course, everyone's favorite question is how much is it going to cost? And funerals are very expensive. So important point to note, there's no standard pricing in the industry. So there are some funeral homes that are very expensive. There are some rock bottom, super cheap funeral homes. And like any other purchase, it's a lot of money. You wouldn't buy a car without shopping around, but because we're also kind of sometimes uncomfortable about talking about death or shopping around, but trust me, it is done all the time. And you need to know which funeral home you're dealing with, and you should definitely compare prices. It's a big deal. And there's no, like I said, there's no standard pricing. So any funeral home can charge basically what they want. So a simple cremation on the low end, which means that, we do the cremation, we take care of all the paperwork, there's no service, we release the ashes to the family, is around $3,000. And then if you did a cremation with services and viewing, etc., can be around $9,000. And these are just ballpark pricing, but again, we're very transparent at Kane Fairley. We're not commission based. You can call me, I'll send you quotes, you can email me, we can have a conversation. And same thing at any funeral home. You should ask for a quote, you should ask for some pricing just to give you an idea when you're shopping around. And these prices, by the way, reflect our funeral home. So what we call a simple burial, meaning you want to be buried, you have cemetery property, and you don't want anyone to see you, no viewing, maybe a little graveside service. So standard on the low end would be about 7,000, and on the high end would be, which means like full traditional, 1-day viewing, service in church or service in our chapel would be about 11,000. So what drives up the cost of a funeral is merchandise. And meaning, you could take a casket that's $1,400, or you could choose a casket that's $8,000. So really it depends on the choices you make. Same thing with an urn, the amount of days that you want to be viewed, cars, limousines, flowers, etc. So the merchandise really adds to the cost. Next slide. So every funeral home in Quebec, pre-arrangements fall under the Office of Consumer Protection, and you can take a look on their website. They do have some good information about that as well. But when you make funeral pre-arrangements, how it works is, again, you can either pay in full, and this is particular to Kane and Fairley, or you can pay monthly. Everyone offers that, but there are some funeral homes that also offer death insurance. We used to offer that, but we don't any longer. But that's where you pay a premium every month. But if you die 2 years and 1 day after you sign the paperwork, but before the end of the contract, the insurance will pay the balance of your funeral expenses. So those are the only options in Quebec. And if you pay using monthly payments with us as an example, then there's no fees or interests. You're paying the exact same price, whether you're paying in full or whether you're paying monthly. Very important question to ask when you're shopping around again. You know, is there financing? How much does it cost? Because you could end up paying twice the amount of the funeral if they add financing to your monthly payment. So that's something to be aware of as well when you're shopping around. And to know that the costs are frozen. That's a standard across all funeral homes. And the no interest is particular to our funeral home as well. The other point that is important in terms of payment options is that now the Quebec government has a registry of prearrangements. So once you make a funeral prearrangement with the funeral home, we need to register it. Meaning when we get a family that walks in to make funeral arrangements, before we can even meet with them, we have to check their name in the register to make sure that their money isn't placed with another funeral home. So that's a protection for the consumer. And we have to let you know, we have to show you proof of search. And, you know, if a family walked in and told me they want to make arrangements, I have to check the registry and I have to let you know, oh, you know, your spouse made arrangements 20 years ago at another funeral home. So that's universal to all funeral homes, as well as the laws governing prearrangements and the money. And the money that you pay monthly or in full has to be placed in trust. That's also the law in Quebec for all funeral homes. So that way that protects the consumer, because we're businesses like any other business, but we're holding your funds. So the money is placed in trust, and that protects you if the funeral home closes or goes bankrupt or burns down or something like that. You know where your money is, and you have the option of either keeping your prearrangement with, say, the new owners if it was sold, or withdrawing your funds and going somewhere else without penalty. Next slide. So something I stress whenever I do these talks is that it's really important to have a discussion with your family, because they're the ones that are going to be left behind and who are going to have to be taking care of all these arrangements. So even if your kids don't want to have a discussion or your spouse doesn't want to talk about it, it could be a hard conversation. I can appreciate that, but it's way harder if nothing's been prepared and you've never had to talk, and you're just putting so much more stress on everyone. And also, I can guarantee you it will end up costing a lot more. When I make prearrangements with people, often people say, oh, simple cremation, put me in a basic cardboard box. For those of you who know us, we're on Carrie and Isabella. I cannot tell you the amount of times people have said to me when I say, what do you want me to do with your ashes? Just throw them over the Carrie Expressway. Like, I've heard that 100 times. But if you don't make prearrangements and your kids are coming in to bury you, I can guarantee you they're not going to say, oh, put mom in a cardboard box and throw her over the Carrie Expressway. They're going to say, oh my God, we can't put her in that. We have to get a nicer casket. Oh, we have to do this. We have to do that. Next thing you know, $10,000 later, they get a huge bill. And it's maybe not something that you want, but it's at the time, it's such an emotional decision for those who are making the arrangements. And as I said, it's like, it's a business like anything else, right? And many funeral homes, the counselors are paid on commission. So obviously they're trying to upsell you. So you can imagine when a family is coming in and they're grieving, there could be times where, you know, people are maybe taken advantage of for that reason. And that's why I cannot stress enough that it's something you should talk about in advance, and you should shop around, and you should get an idea of pricing and what you like and what's important to you, and definitely share this information with your family. That's most important. Next slide. So the only thing is, once you call funeral homes, they might come after you to try to get you to sign. So it's important to know that it is not legal for a funeral home to call you cold calling. If you go to a funeral and you sign the register book and you have not inquired or given your name, they are not allowed to read that register book and start calling you and harassing you to make funeral arrangements. So that's already something you should be aware of. We are allowed to go to individuals' homes to meet them, to make arrangements, but our meetings are not allowed to last more than 2 hours. We're not allowed to pressure you. And by law, even after you sign the contract, you could have given me a check, you have 30 days to cancel. So 30 days to think of, I'm not comfortable with this, or I felt a bit rushed, or some people sign the contract and only then speak to your family. And then there's all sorts of questions that come up after. So you do have 30 days to cancel. But after 30 days, there's a 10% penalty on the amount that you've paid. So if you're on a payment plan and you've only made one payment, it's only 30% of, say, that $100 payment. But if you've paid in full and it's $10,000, well, then it's 30% of that. And all contracts that you negotiate with the funeral home need to be itemized. So it should be very, very clear, so that if you pass this contract on to a friend or a family member to have a look, they should be able to see how many, do you have a limousine? Do you have flowers? It should be very clear and itemized, and the pricing should be clear as well. Again, a lot of this information could be found on the website for the consumer protection under funeral arrangements and funeral pre-arrangements. Next slide. So once you do sign your pre-arrangement contract, you should get a copy of all your signed documents. You get an original of what you signed. You should get receipts for all payment. You will receive, more likely than not, pre-arrangement cards. We call them little emergency cards that people carry with them in their wallet. So if something happens to you, they know which funeral home to call. By law, we have 45 days from date of signing to send your pre-arrangement into the registry, and you should get copies of the documentation that your pre-arrangement has been registered. Next slide. Funeral homes must place funds that they remit into the trust within 45 days of signing. The trust company will send a confirmation of deposit to the consumer. In Quebec, it's either La Caisse des Jardins or Banque Nationale that takes care of funeral pre-arrangements. And as I mentioned, the Office of the Consumer Protection can help you out if you have any question. And all these laws are in place to protect the consumer, because so many people, I think, feel nervous a little bit, and they're worried about what will happen down the, 20, 25 years down the line if the business closes. I can tell you where funeral homes are often audited. There are many mechanisms in place to make sure the money is protected. There are many rules that we have to follow. And again, because the money is placed in trust, you are protected. Next slide, please. So when you do go to the funeral home to make arrangements, they're going to ask your family name and your maiden name, where you were born, the full name of your parents. They'll need your social insurance number, your Medicare card number, and they're going to ask for a contact person, a next of kin. If you own cemetery property, they need to know with which cemetery and the plot number. This is all very normal. I know people get nervous sometimes about asking social insurance number. The reason we ask for all this information is because this is the information we need when a person passes to register the death with civil status. And we like to get it from the person who's signing the contract, because sometimes later on the family doesn't have access to that information, or they don't know where the papers are. So we try to get all the information at the meeting of the pre-arrangement, so it makes it easier when the time comes. Next slide. So one very, very important document that you will that's on the funeral pre-arrangement contract is the copy of act of death. And all of us, as funeral counselors, will explain that the reason it's on the contract is because that's the official death certificate in Quebec. It's called the copy of act of death, but it's the official death certificate. And it is the document that confirms someone's death. In Quebec, it is generated by the directeur de l'état civil. And like acts of birth, marriage, and civil union, the act of death is entered into a register and kept by the director. This register is a big database administered by the Quebec government that has the essential information about every Quebec resident. And that's a document you need when someone dies, you know, to open the estate account and the banking and stuff like that. So when you're shopping around for pre-arrangements, you should ask them what document services they offer as well, because as the funeral home can ask to do all the paperwork to get the copy of act of death. We could do the will searches. We could apply for the 2,500, which is the death benefit, an amount that comes back to the estate to help pay funeral arrangements. And we can also help set up the surviving widow's pension. So that's all part of our job. And usually these document service, the cost for it is put on the pre-arrangement, which is great because again, you're freezing that price today. Next slide. So why is the copy of act of death important, and why do we have to ask for all that information to create the copy of act of death? It's because it legally establishes a person's death. It lets the estate of the deceased be settled, and it also ends various benefits and government programs such as, you know, the Medicare card, driver's license, pension, social assistance. And it sets a date from which the surviving spouse is entitled to receive benefits, notably the Quebec pension plan. Next slide. So for those of you who are interested in repatriation, I'll just touch on this a little bit. It's something we do quite a bit at Kane Fairley. But if that's something that's of interest to you, again, you can give me a call, but the funeral home will ask you for passports, for flight details, because a lot of people say, can I bring my mom's ashes back home? So yes, you can. You could bring it in your carry-on luggage on the plane. We will help you with all that paperwork, but we would need the passport of the deceased. We need the passport of the person traveling. We need the flight details of the person traveling. And then sometimes, depending on the country, there's embassy fees, translation fees, because as you know, the copy of act of death now in Quebec is only in French. So for those of you who are dual citizens, if you're American as well, and you have to settle, you know, pensions or cancel anything in the US, you're going to have that copy of act of death officially translated. So there's also translation fees. Next slide. So that's it. That's a brief overview of kind of the process of what I go through when I meet a family for pre-arrangements. Like I said, you know, my information's available. I don't know, I'll probably be sharing my email, but please feel free to call me or email me if you have any questions with that obligation. Even if, you know, you're not using Kane and Fairley, there's absolutely no problem because I feel it's such an important topic. And again, like I said, it's a business like anything else. So don't be shy about shopping around. Don't be shy about calling. We get calls all day long from people for pre-arrangements. And even, you know, when someone's died, people, we call them shoppers. People shop around. It's a big expense. And it's something you should feel free, you know, not everyone's comfortable doing it or thinking it's appropriate that you can do that, but I really want to encourage you. It definitely is. And you should do your research like anything else.
Mary, thank you ever so much. This was tremendous, a great deal of information. And I saw questions were going in the chat box and questions were going in the other column. So Katia, I guess she's there. I don't see her.
Yep, I see her.
Hiya.
Oh,
Okay.
Are you ready for some questions for Mary?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Turn it over to you. Oh, there she is.
So first question, do you have to use a funeral home?
You do. That's a good question.
Okay.
You need a funeral home because the funeral home is, we're the ones who do the transportation of deceased. So from hospital, place of death, nursing home, private residence, and we're also the one that registers the death. We're licensed, and we are the ones that register the death with civil status. So yes, you need to use a funeral home. Good question. Yeah.
I thought I'd start with the.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of questions came in about pre-arrangements. So I'll set them up for you. I'll line them up. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, cool. So just to clarify, let's say you do your pre-arrangements and you've paid in advance.
Yeah,
Funeral home closes down or there's a new owner.
right.
What happens with the price that's in the contract? Is it locked in, or is there a possibility of it having to be renegotiated with the new owner?
No, it's locked in. And that's kind of like the inventory of a funeral home. So that's kind of the if a funeral home sells, they like the pre-arrangements because that's inventory. That's really where I guess the money is. So no, it's locked in, and you should receive a letter saying that the funeral home has been sold, and then you're given the option of whether you want to stay with the funeral home under the existing conditions or whether you want to cancel and go somewhere else.
Dokes. So when you were talking about pre-arrangements, my brain went into, well, what happens if you want to change what's in your pre-arrangements? How do you go about that?
Good question. So whoever signs the pre-arrangement and pays the pre-arrangement, whoever pays the pre-arrangement is the purchaser. So the purchaser is allowed to make any changes at any point. So say I make my pre-arrangement and this happens a lot. I have people who've made pre-arrangements, 15 years ago. And then they say, oh, I had such a big funeral plan, but unfortunately I'm the last one. I'm the last one in my family. My friends are gone. I want to downsize. So they just come back in and they change their pre-arrangements. And there's with us, and again, I'm speaking from Kane and Fetterly's perspective, but a question to ask other funeral homes. With us, there's no fees or penalties. If you're downsizing, we issue a refund. And if you're adding to your pre-arrangements, you just pay us the difference. However, if the purchaser is the person who dies, so say I made my pre-arrangements, I paid my pre-arrangements, I die, my kids come in to meet the funeral director, to set the date and time of the funeral. By law, my wishes need to be respected. So if I want to be buried, my kids cannot come in and say, no, let's cremate her and please give me a refund, for the pre-arrangement. No, their wishes have to be respected. And there have been cases in Quebec where this has gone to court, and they always side with the wishes of those who've made their pre-arrangements. So it's meant to be respected. But you yourself as a purchaser, while you're alive, you can make any changes you want.
Okay, and so if someone else is the purchaser, they cannot make.
If someone else is, say I go into the funeral home with my daughter and I tell the director what kind of arrangements I want, but my daughter is a purchaser, so she buys a pre-arrangement for me. At the time of my passing, she can make changes. So the purchaser can make changes at any point, before or after death.
Oh, okay. Question just came in which piggybacks on that. Can I put instructions into my funeral contract to prevent the people there from upselling? And then the person's using some experience that, well, I'll just read it, so I hope it's okay to whoever did it. But both my grandmother's and mother's prepaid funeral, we were pressured to buy more services and products. It was an unpleasant experience. Can I put a clause to prevent family members having to go through this?
Yes, if you put your pre-arrangement in place, you could put a clause saying, I want my funeral wishes to be respected completely as they are in this contract. Meaning at the time they can't say, oh, because little changes like merchandise that people could buy anywhere, the funeral home will allow you to make changes. So if you have no flowers in your contract, and at the time of your funerals, your kids want to add flowers, obviously the funeral home's going to let you because they're still respecting your wishes. But whether you buy flowers from the funeral home or from the florist down the street, there's nothing stopping you. So, but yes, you could, there's a note section in the contract where you can say absolutely as is has to be respected. Yes.
And again, with the pre-arrangements, what happens if you as an okay, I need coffee. You as an individual, you decide to move to another province, city, or country?
Yeah, so by law with the law of consumer protection, you can cancel a pre-arrangement at any point, but there is a 10% penalty. Not all funeral homes charge that 10% penalty? So that's a good question to ask, because it happens, you know, people live here, their kids live in Ontario. As people get older, their kids want them closer. So they've made arrangements here. Some funeral homes, you can transfer your pre-arrangement because they're part of a big company, so it's transferable. So you could find out if you could transfer it to where you're moving to. Otherwise, you could cancel it, but there is a 10% penalty. And there have even been cases where people have arrangements with us, pre-arrangements with us, but they died while on vacation, but they were on vacation in their home country. So they said and in their funeral pre-arrangement, they want to be repatriated, say back to Jamaica. So obviously we're not going to send someone back to Montreal at the time of death and then send them back to Jamaica. So we just cancel the pre-arrangement and all the services take place in Jamaica and they got a full refund. But that's a question. These are all great questions that you should ask when you're making your pre-arrangement. Can I cancel? What happens if I die while traveling? What happens if I move? Those are all very important questions.
So cross your T's and dot your I's.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay. When you were giving the kind of average costs of funerals, someone actually, I thought it was a great question. With regards to prices, they asked specifically about co-op funeral homes. Are the prices the same, or are they different?
Well, I don't know because I work at Kane Fairly, but the co-ops, there is like a company called Les Coopératives or something.
Okay.
The pricing would be different, I think. Yeah, because every funeral home has different pricing. You could pay a simple cremation with some funeral homes. I've heard of it as low as like $1,000, and I've heard of it as high as $5,000. Really, honestly, I would say we're somewhere in the middle, but just to give you an idea, the price is that there's so much of a range. That's why it's really important you could just call the funeral home, shop around. Sometimes they have it on their website even.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And by law, the pricing should be transparent. Sorry, they have to tell you the price.
Okay, I was just about to ask that, so you read my mind. Okay, perfect. Okay, now I'm going to go into kind of talking about kind of specific things about funerals. So there were a lot of questions about people donating their body to science.
Right. Yeah, I get that a lot. So in Quebec that I'm aware of, there's two options. I know McGill has a body donor program, McGill University. And if you just Google McGill body donor program, it's going to pop up. They have a really good information page. From my understanding, it's not something you could do in advance because they may not need any bodies at that point. They may be full, frankly. I've spoken to the person there many times. Or sometimes you're not. I see Ruth laughing. Sometimes you're not accepted for whatever medical reasons or something. So they cannot guarantee that at the time of your death, they will necessarily need you. But say you do go with the body donor program, that is an option. And then they're affiliated with a funeral home that takes care of the transportation, that takes care of the documentation, and that will contact the family in a couple of years. I think it's about 2 years, they say, to see if the family wants the ashes back or whether they want the funeral home to take care of it. Also, there's Collège Rosemont here in Quebec. That's where the embalmers train in Quebec. That's the only school here that it's a 3-year deck to become an embalmer. And of course, they need to practice. So they also accept body donations. But again, it's not something, as far as I understand, that could be done in advance.
Okay. Then people were asking questions about the differences between being cremated and being buried. So the first question that popped up is, let's say you don't want a funeral, but you want to be cremated, and you just want your family to get your ashes. What are the legalities involved in that?
Yeah, so that's honestly so popular. That's what's called like a simple cremation. So that means, at the time of death, the funeral home picks you up, again, whether home, hospital, seniors residence. You're cremated, we register the death with civil status, and we return the ashes to the family. The family comes to the funeral home and picks them up. And then whatever the family does with the ashes, that's on them. They could keep them at home. They could scatter them. They could bury them. You're not supposed to really bury them in your backyard, but we don't know what families are doing with it. We have to keep a registry of where the ashes have gone. So in the registry, it would say release to family. And that's kind of where it ends. So that's the legalities. And I could say that's one of the most popular options, what's known as a simple cremation. And sometimes people take those ashes and then organize a service at church with them. Sometimes they do a celebration of life. For that part, you don't need a funeral home. You could do that on your own. When there's a casket involved, you need a funeral home to do, you know, something in a church or a place of worship. But with ashes, you do not. So far, the law, you do not need a funeral home or a funeral director. You can organize a service wherever you like on your own.
Okay. So that being said, that you can't bury ashes in your backyard, what happens if, well, a question came up is, can you bury people, and I'm assuming it's in a casket, either on a property or someone's home instead of a plot in a cemetery? Is
No.
that legally allowed?
No.
Okay.
No.
So it has to be in a plot in a cemetery.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then someone just popped in this question, is there a law about not scattering ashes? Is it?
So that's really a gray zone. I think they're putting pressure so that it would be made into law that you cannot do that. But at this point, no, there's no law. Some funeral homes will scatter ashes for you. There's a charge for that, of course. Others will not. So that's a question to ask the funeral home. You can, as a family, you can scatter ashes yourself. Yeah, it's not illegal.
Yeah.
And even the like even if you have an urn, if you read the law, it just says, you know, kind of for scattering of ashes, it says like use common sense and common decency. Like don't go to a park on a busy windy day and throw the ashes in the air, or go to a beach and throw the ashes in the air. But you can do it, you know, in a respectful way.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one final question. What happens for someone who has to plan their own funeral, but there's no next of kin, there's no family, there's no one? What happens in a situation like that?
So there is some paperwork that they can sign on
Mhm.
their behalf, like you can sign your own cremation application. So there is paperwork that you can sign. It's always better if there's someone, a friend, a neighbor. Some people use a notary to be the person who will take care of things, because who's going to receive the death certificate? Who is going to handle the settlement of the estate or closing of the bank account? So there needs to be a person who's going to take care of all that. But we have had cases where there was really absolutely no one, or that the next of kin that we had on file predeceased the person. So sometimes that does happen. Like you
And
could
so-
name someone and it could be someone younger than you and you're like, okay, they'll take care of things. But you know, you never know when someone's going to die. So sometimes they die before you.
And then what happens in a situation like that if someone
So if there's really no one,
Mhm.
the police get involved and they do a search and they try to find a next of kin or a responsible person.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we work with them. We're very resourceful. We've had cases where we have to hunt down neighbors or social workers, or, you know, and often people will step up if
Okay.
it's someone they've known. Yeah.
And I'm going to ask one final kind of existential question for you, Mary. 'Cause I know you do a lot of counseling. Why do you think people are nervous or apprehensive to have these conversations about death, or kind of starting the conversation with loved ones of, hey, by the way, this is what I want when my time's up?
Mhm. I think people are uncomfortable. I think it's cultural. And some cultures, we just don't talk about it. And I know from meeting families, a lot of times when one spouse is really reluctant, doesn't want to talk about it, I think people are scared, honestly, to die. And I think they feel if they prearrange or they make arrangements or they talk about it, it's like a superstition, something's going to happen. Most people have life insurance though, so when nothing happens to them, you know, it's just one more way in being prepared. But I think it's out of fear, to be honest, and discomfort. And kids, I always hear like, oh, I tried to talk to my kids about it. They don't want to know about it. Well, you're going to have to do it anyway. Sit them down and make them listen. And it's a really good idea, but I think people are scared, frankly.
So it's a long-term conversation that takes many steps, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Like a big therapy session, group
Exactly.
therapy session.
Exactly. And it's good if you can, you know, it's a good idea to tell all your kids. Sometimes people only talk to one because that's the only one who'll listen. And then when the time comes, is that poor sibling is having to convince the other siblings, no, I swear this is what mom wanted. So write a letter to all of them. And if they don't want to hear about it now, write a letter, keep it with your will. And when the time comes, at least it's coming from your mouth. This is what you want, because it can really cause so many problems in families.
And just added stress in a pretty emotional time as well. So yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, thanks for this. I think.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Mary. This was very informative, and oh dear, what happened when my, sorry about that. A great deal of information. Thank you ever so much. And you could see that people had a lot of questions. And I do recommend everybody do it in advance. My mother did it. I didn't even know she had done it. She did it in 69. She passed away in 98. And if you had figured, she only paid about $619 for the work.
Amazing.
And if we had to have had to pay in 98, it would have been a lot more.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. Your mother was way ahead of her time. Impressive.
That's right. So it was a great gift. Thank you ever so much for those on the line. And I hope my phone does not ring again. We will be sending you Mary's presentation. A link will come to you from Seniors Action Quebec in approximately 10 days. And also SAQ will be uploading it on YouTube and their website, seniorsactionquebec.ca. And you will be getting a survey attached to it to please fill it out. It's very important for stats for our final report and for our funder. And I thank everybody for their attendance, and I think the webinars have been great. I think you've appreciated them. And I know, Katya, did you want to take just 2 minutes to talk about the one that you have coming up on March the 18th?
Yeah, sure. So our final webinar for the what year are we? The 24-25 financial year is going to be on March 18th, which is a Tuesday from 10 to noon. Called Demystifying Retirement. So we're gonna it's gonna be a little bit different from the ones we've done this year. So all of the information is on our website. I'm just gonna go and grab the link and pop it in the box. And to register for that webinar, you should email us directly at info@seniorsactionquebec.ca. So I'm just gonna grab the link and pop it in the chat. And if there's anything, just send us an email, and you know, we'll be sending more information and promo on this, so you'll all get the information if you're on our newsletter. So keep your eyes out for that one.
Thank you ever so much, Katya, and I think it's going to be a great webinar. And Mary, thanks once again. Thanks, Brendan, and all the participants for sticking with us. And have a marvelous rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.